Okay, welcome back, everyone. And again, we have a fantastic speaker, Dr. Molly Lawlor, coming all the way from Canada today. Um, I won't spend a lot of time on a more formal introduction, but Molly was introduced to us, connected by Mark, and over the last few months, Molly has been kind enough to review a lot of our work, to offer some very sharp insights, feedback, and perspectives on the components of our program. And I think it's always been a great experience in a conversation with her. And we always come away after a conversation with something that says, we could think about it like that. So I think it's always been a great experience. And thank you so much, Molly, for agreeing to join us today and sharing your insights on SEL and readiness to learn. So with that, I think over to you for the next 20, 25, 30 minutes or so.
Okay, great. It's really lovely to be here, and I'm just going to make sure everyone can hear me. Yes, good.
Molly, yes, the audio will be just fine. So once you start sharing your application window, I'll hide myself and the audience will see it.
I am going to find my PowerPoint and okay, everybody see that? Okay, good.
Yes, Molly, go ahead.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm really thrilled to be here today with you all on your morning and my evening. I'm in British Columbia, Canada, and today I'm going to be speaking about enabling readiness to learn with social and emotional learning. And my background is I've been involved with program development for a number of years now in the field of social and emotional learning. Also thinking about contemplative education alongside SC. Is that working now? Okay, great, perfect. Okay, so so what I'm going to speak about today is talking about the importance of social and emotional development and kind of zoom in on the early years a little bit, how social emotional learning supports learning readiness, and then kind of also take a deeper dive into 3 areas of focus. Mark really did a brilliant job of setting this up for me in his keynote, looking at the students, the adults, and the context in the classroom. And so I'm going to start with a question to consider for you all. And I'm wondering, what matters more for school and life success? Is it more important your IQ or your EQ? And your EQ meaning your emotional intelligence. And I thought of a way to do a poll for this. So if you think it's IQ, you can press the little light bulb, and if you think it's EQ, press the heart emoji. And most of you probably are leaning towards EQ. And so some of you may have heard of Daniel Goleman, or Dan Goleman. He's a psychologist and also as a founder of Castle, along with Mark. He wrote, he's written quite a lot about this, about, that we know that our analytical intelligence isn't really all that responsible for our job success and other real world outcomes. It's really our ability to get along with others, to work in groups, to cooperate. And we're seeing this being appreciated in companies and hiring. When you go out and you apply for jobs, companies and human resource departments are starting to actually look for emotional intelligence in their candidates because they need people who can solve problems in creative ways. They need people that can work with one another and solve conflicts peacefully. So SEL is really, really critical for all of our success and our young people in particular. So when I think about or talk about social emotional learning and development in the early years, what I mean by that is really helping to develop the capacity of young children to form close, secure, and supportive adult and peer relationships, to be able to experience and express and regulate a full range of their emotions. And so Mark spoke a little bit about this, and with that comes to be able to self-regulate your behavior to achieve your goals, and to be able to explore and learn from their environment. And we know that, our early life experiences can have lasting and profound effects on our mental and physical health throughout the trajectory of our lives. And, early stress, adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, have been, really found to be very predictive of problems later on. Now, the good news is that we know that some of this can be mitigated by positive interventions, positive connections with other and positive healthy relationships. So we know, also that social emotional development isn't just about the individual. It's really about this interplay between both the individual factors like our genetics and our temperament, what we come into the world with, and also our environmental factors. So how supportive our home environments are, and how supportive our school environments are, also our early schooling. So it's really this interplay between the individual and their environment that shapes their social and emotional development. One theory that I think is really interesting that's come out, over the last number of years, Dr. Tom Boyce has spoken quite a lot about this, is this idea of our biological sensitivity to context, and this notion of dandelion and orchid children. And so when you think about the two plants, the orchid and the dandelion, orchids need really specific conditions to grow and to blossom and to thrive. Whereas dandelions kind of can grow anywhere. You see them in the smallest little tiny crack in the pavement with really poor soil quality, and they still seem to manage to survive. And so when we think about this, we're talking about these two different types of plants, and we think there's two different types of children. So if you have an orchid child, that child may be very sensitive to their context, and they may need a very specific nurturing context in order to bloom, but they may have the most beautiful skills and abilities, but they really need a very supportive and nurturing context. Whereas a dandelion child may be somewhat more resilient to their context and not need so much support, perhaps, but maybe not shine quite as much as the orchid. So it's just an interesting sort of metaphor to think about our children. And I think, if you think in your own life, you may recognize some dandelions and orchids, or in yourself, sort of a tendency towards one or the other. And I think the important thing here is to think about how, as adults, we're looking at how we're providing these contexts to kids so that they can thrive and grow and give them the sort of nourishment and fertilizer and water and all of those things that they need to be their best selves. So we've seen this already once this evening from Mark, and I'm going to come back to it and go a little bit deeper into these 5 areas of social and emotional learning, specifically thinking about young children. And so this is an area. I'm also a mother of two girls, and so I've been going through this developmental process in my own home, and in developing programming for young children as well. And Learning Curve, I will say, has done a spectacular job of really setting up their framework to acknowledge the developmental steps and appropriateness of what we want to be teaching across these different competencies. So thinking about self-awareness, the ability to understand our emotions and our strengths and limitations and have a growth mindset. When we think about young children, it's beginning with, how do they understand their emotions? How do they recognize what they're feeling? And so for in an earlier situation, I would start with, helping them identify in the body, how do you feel when you're feeling upset? Are you feeling it in your tummy? Are you feeling your shoulders hunch up? Getting them to kind of identify those sensations and then making those connections with the feelings. For the adults, this is all relevant to all of us throughout our all of human development. And so for the adults in the room, the self-awareness piece is it's actually articulating your own emotions in front of children in a developmentally appropriate way, so that they're starting to gain that that language and that literacy of understanding the different terms for the different kinds of feelings. And when you're, going through something, or as a family or as a parent going through, what does it feel like when you're frustrated, or what does it feel like when you're happy, and really expressing those for kids. Self-management is, being able to regulate your emotions and your behaviors to achieve your goals. A lot of times people hear the term self-regulation or self-control. These are sort of related terms. But for young children, this is a big one. This is really where we think about a lot. We think about toddlers, and they're known for their temper tantrums, because they don't have their brain development isn't there yet to really fully regulate emotions. But this is where we begin with young children, is helping them, really first with self-awareness, identify what am I feeling, and then self-management. Okay, what am I going to do now? And in programming that I've been involved with, it's just maybe simply these, I call them pre-mindfulness skills, is just taking a deep breath, learning how to regulate physiology just through deep breathing, or seeking out co-regulation with an adult. This is a really key piece for the adult, being able to be with the child and understand that the child isn't developmentally ready to do that on their own. They need somebody there with them to coach them and to take deep breaths together. And then social awareness is really, being able to understand the perspective of another, show empathy for others. And for young children, this begins with, this is starting those skills to become, in the next one, relationship skills, to become a good friend, being able to understand, how does the child next to me want the same toy as me, and how are we going to work this out? I think for young children, literature is such a fabulous tool. I know many of you listening are probably nodding your head, using stories and really calling out, what do we think this character's feeling right now? Would you feel the same way? And then moving into relationship skills, for young children, it's learning how to be friends, learning how to share, learning how to navigate those early friendships. And for the adults, it's about modeling this. Modeling is such a key thing for the early years. If you have a staff together, modeling cooperation, modeling together, getting kids in dyads and working together, even role play using puppets. All of these sorts of things are really important ways that we can model and teach kids, again, this explicit teaching of how do we be a good friend, and how do we also solve our problems in peaceful ways. And just, I know Mark mentioned this about, avoiding punitive discipline. And in the early years, it's a beautiful time to really start with restorative practice and getting kids involved with, if there has been a little tussle over a puzzle or a game or something, how do we work together to repair that relationship so that it's really normalized? This is how we are together. Yes, we are going to have our disagreements, but then how do we come together and solve them in a peaceful way? And then responsible decision making, Mark spoke about this, and making ethical and responsible choices and understanding the consequences of our behavior. So for younger children, it's about how do I stay safe? What are those decisions that I need to make to stay safe? So for little ones, it's, staying on the sidewalk and not going outside without an adult, or, these sorts of things. So it's that would be what I would suggest to focus on around SEL for the early years. And so one thing that's really exciting is that we know that social and emotional skills are malleable. They can be taught, and that explicitly taught. And Mark did speak to this, that it is important that we do this explicit teaching. As much as we know that children are, sponges and do absorb a lot of what we put out there, there is that important piece of where programs can serve that role, where they can provide developmentally appropriate, sequenced skill instruction that really is helpful for teachers, I think, because if a teacher is new to SEL and they don't know where to start, a program is a really great, an evidence-based program is a really great place to help them begin, and then you can go from there and integrate that learning into your instructional practice, and to be reinforcing these concepts in all throughout the day, as Mark mentioned. So again, we know that the goals of teaching the SEL skills are around helping kids recognize and manage their emotions, to form healthy relationships and to make our responsible and caring and ethical decisions. And again, our world really needs this, having care for themselves and others, and putting themselves in that circle of care. Another area of research I've been interested in is around self-compassion, and I don't have time tonight to go too much into that, but I think that's an important piece as well, that we bring ourselves into that circle of care. And for educators and families and parents bring themselves into that circle of care is so important. It's important modeling for young kids. So neuroplasticity, and so I'm not a neuroscientist, but I do know a little bit about it. We know from the past, 10, 15 years or so that our brains are not fixed. So we used to think that, you grew up, you became an adult, your brain was then hardwired, and that was it. We knew that it was somewhat, plastic in the early years, but now we know it's actually changing all the time, and our brain changes with experience. And in the early years, it is actually, an enormous period of growth, and it's a really key time that we can make really positive change for kids and help them develop healthy habits of mind that through neuroplasticity. But there's hope for us all. So for those adults and thinking about the adult SEL, neuroplasticity can help us all too. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And we know that, the research, Mark talked a little bit about this, that it's really is predictive of success later in life. Here's a study that Mark was actually a co-author on, that followed kids from kindergarten, looking at their either pro-social, their teachers rated their pro-social skills, so things like cooperation and listening and getting along with others, and then followed them up 13 and 19 years later and found that they were actually, those kids with higher social skills, as rated by their teachers in kindergarten, were doing better. So they were more likely to graduate from high school, they were more likely to get a college degree, they were more likely to have stable employment, and less likely to have more negative outcomes, like being involved with the police or having to be on public assistance. So it's a really important thing that we focus on the early years and social emotional development, because it does have that, and Mark talked about the cost benefit of that as well. So I want to quickly just talk about some potential barriers, or really one big barrier that isn't insurmountable, but we need to all be aware of, and that's the effect of toxic stress. And so we know that stress is really problematic for us all, but especially for young children and learning. I'm sure if you think about a time when you were stressed, you feel a little bit discombobulated. You can't, you put something down and you can't remember where it is. You're a little bit, your fuse is shortened. You have less patience. You're less able to focus and pay attention. And so you can think about the effect of that on a young child is profound. And so we know that, early stress can impair the development of self-regulation, which is so predictive of later success in life. It interferes with learning. It can cause behavioral problems. But the good news is that adult support can be protective. So again, it comes back to us as the adult to really provide that context of support, love, and nurturing to mitigate the risks of stress. So a couple of studies I'll just mention briefly that looked at this idea of stress contagion. Is stress contagious? We know that actually, yes, emotions are contagious. If you think of a time you've been with a really stressed out person, you start to catch it. You start to kind of be a little bit on edge. On the flip side, when you're with somebody who's really positive and exuding happiness, you start to actually, that rubs off on you as well. So these effects have been shown in the classroom. There's one study in 2011 found that first grade students who were with teachers who reported higher levels of stress actually exhibited higher levels of internalizing and externalizing behavioral issues. And then a second study, which was out of UBC, where I am, Kim Schroner-Reichel and her colleague Ava Oberle, looked at stress contagion, looking at teachers' burnout, level of burnout, and the stress hormone cortisol in students, and found that teachers who were self-reported at higher levels of burnout or high occupational stress had students with more dysregulated morning cortisol patterns. So that was actually, getting under the skin of those kids compared to teachers who reported less occupational stress and burnout. So this is, pretty profound research that we need to be aware of and understand, the context really has such a significant impact on our young people. And so just quickly, talking about, again, the effects of stress on learning, we know that our brains function better when we're not in a stressed emotional state, when stress can impair important cognitive functions that are vital for learning and problem solving. These are called executive functions, and these are three core cognitive skills that start developing in the early years. Working memory, our inhibitory control, and cognitive flexibility. And these are housed in the prefrontal cortex, which is going under massive construction throughout early years in childhood and adolescence. These functions have been studied a lot over the last 10 to 15 years, and they are very predictive of outcomes. And actually, EFs are more predictive of academic success than IQ. Now, the problem is that these can be impaired by stress. And so a lot of my other work, I'm very focused on well-being. And well-being is, kind of part of this whole social and emotional world, because it's really important that our children are happy and know how to nurture their well-being and know how to have skills for self-care. And so why I bring this up with the executive functions is that we actually know from some science that our mood actually impacts our ability, our working memory, our cognitive flexibility, our attentional control. When we're feeling sad, we have poor attentional control. So if you have a child, in a classroom situation who is unhappy, feeling sadness, they're less likely to retain information. But on the flip side, when we're feeling happy, we have better cognitive flexibility, we're more creative, and we're more able to, solve problems and have divergent thinking. So it's really important that we are aware of our students' emotional lives, that we are prioritizing their education on their heart and soul. And we know, relationships are central. We are social beings. I think, this last year has really shone a light on this of needing to socially distance from one another, and how that has been very challenging, and certainly challenging for our youth. I know I'm speaking about young children now, but our teens and our adolescents who haven't been able to be together has been a challenge. And so, when you feel like you don't belong, or you feel like you're disconnected, that can actually impair your executive functioning as well. So this really underscores the importance of developing, those inclusive classroom environments that Mark was speaking about, those caring, nurturing places where everybody feels they belong, because that's really foundational for all learning. You have to feel safe and connected to your peers and your teachers. That sets the stage for being able to learn. So now I'm going to spend the last little bit here around how do we do this? How do we promote students' academic, social, and emotional skills? And there are three areas that is really critical, and Castle certainly speaks to this around, focusing on the context, as I've been speaking to, as well as Mark, SEL of students and the SEL of educators. And so focusing on the students, really thinking about young children, I think the first, where do we start? I'd say three things. So helping children first learn to recognize and manage their emotions, helping them to learn and recognize and solve social problems, and helping kids learn to be friends. So I spoke a little bit about this when I was going through the five castle competencies on things that, what would be sort of developmentally appropriate here. And we know that, we need to start with the self-awareness of self-management, I think, because that sort of fits into everything else. If you can't, it's very hard to solve a social problem if you can't manage your emotions. So that's where I would suggest to start. And Dr. Dan Siegel, who has written prolifically, he's written a book, it came out a number of years ago, The Whole Brain Child, which I think is a really nice book for families and early childhood educators. And he talks about name it to tame it. And so it's this idea of when kids can actually put a label to what they're feeling, that actually reduces the intensity of that emotion. When you're feeling anger, it's just all consuming. But when a child has a word for it and can identify what that is, it helps them to then regulate it. You need to be able to name it, and then you can regulate it. And so emotion regulation, it's really being able to understand and balance our emotions. So it's beginning with that awareness of like, oh, I'm even having an emotion. Sometimes we act without even recognizing what's sort of prompting our reactions. I think we can all kind of think of children that we've known or worked with who are hot-headed or quick to react. Being aware and being able to label can kind of help to extend that period for them so that they can make a better choice. As I've talked about, understanding and labeling emotions, and then managing our emotions to meet goals. So this is an ongoing skills that are built in the early years and continue to be practiced and practiced and practiced throughout our entire lives. And, throughout development, as we get into middle childhood and into adolescence, we have mixed emotions and all of those things. So this is also critical throughout the entire lifespan. And so I think, I've talked a lot about this. I'm just going to quickly say, we know that this is a really important skill. And if kids don't develop these emotion regulation skills and they're dysregulated, we know it's a core feature of later problems and maladjustment. So I mentioned this a little bit about, where do you begin with young children? It's just about, giving them a library or a glossary of terms of all the different emotions, being able to help them identify where they feel their emotions in their bodies, and then start with simple techniques around how to manage them, those big emotions, and deep belly breathing. It can be really helpful. And again, all of this needs to happen in supportive and nurturing environments. And that co-regulation is key as well, having the adult there to help. And so here are just some examples of opportunities for kids to practice identifying emotions and understanding, what do I look like when I feel these different things, and really getting that into their regular vocabulary, and then pulling it into, if you're doing, circle time and reading a story, bringing it into that social awareness piece of what the characters might be feeling and what emotions might have been coming up for them. And the focus on the adult, of course, there's this adult at the front of the room often, which really sets the tone. And I'm not going to speak too much about this. Mark did a beautiful job talking about the model that he and Tish Jennings developed. But they are at the beginning of the room and they really set the tone. And we know, from the science now around stress contagion, how critical that is. And Mark spoke about the research around the care program, and how that's been really exciting to see, things can change. And there was some other research came out in 2013, Nurbe Singh and colleagues, where they had preschool teachers actually take a mindfulness-based course. And they found, in addition to positive effects for the teachers, they found that the students had positive behavioral changes, which was really exciting because the students didn't get the program. It was the teachers. So what that really indicates is that it's what we bring into the room has an impact on what happens with our students. So the other piece, I talked about modeling earlier. And so this is really, children need to witness these pro-social attitudes and behaviors. And, this is so critical. And I think, the other day in the United States, we saw sort of the opposite of this, of what happens when we have bad behavior and people get caught up and mirror that. I think a lot of people are regretting some of their behavior, but they were caught up in that moment. So we need to create this sort of pro-social value orientation by modeling and providing the opportunities too for kids to behave pro-socially and recognize how that feels good for them. And so finally, I'm going to just talk about the context briefly and how important that is. And I always come back to, if you do nothing else, relationships, that's the key foundational thing. We are social beings and we need to feel connected. And so our students need to feel cared for and supported and connected. When we think about epigenetics and how we are the interplay between the individual and the environment, that supportive environment is so key, and it can be both promotive and also preventive for positive outcomes. And so we know, when kids feel like they belong in their school, they're more engaged, they have better academic outcomes, and they have higher levels of well-being, which are all really important things. We know, some more findings for you. Kids who are connected do better in school as well. They have higher grades, they have higher graduation rates, and also they're less likely to engage in risky behaviors because they are positively connected and have healthy relationships with members in their school community. So one of the things we have that I talk about it sometimes is helping kids meet their sort of fundamental needs for having. Mark talked about having a voice, feeling the sense of community, as I said, being valued by the learning community. Part of this can be accomplished by creating learning or creating agreements. So having students be a part of what do we want to feel like in this class? How do we want to behave with one another? Now, for young children, you might say, well, that sounds a little complicated. Yes. So for younger children, I would say, just allow them to have input on decorating their classroom. Maybe they're going to do some art and you're going to display it around the room. Many of you are doing this already, I'm sure. But just sort of identifying what are those sort of things that we can do to help them have a little voice, sharing in a circle. If they have a snack time, do they get to have a choice of what they're going to have out of some healthy options, hopefully? And then, of course, helping them to contribute to the community. And so this is important. Mark talked about service learning for older adolescents being critical, and that is. For younger kids, they can help bring the snack out. They can help put things away. They can help, if one child already knows how to tie shoes, they can help a younger child that doesn't know yet. So providing these opportunities for them to gain a sense of competence and to be contributors is really important. So my take-home messages for you today are to, provide students with instruction and skill building opportunities that foster their SEL and their well-being, and promoting adults. Social emotional competence is critical as well. And for when we're talking about this, I'll bring back that self-compassion piece again. We're not perfect, and we're not going to have, be the best educator every single day. We're going to have those times of stress, but being able to have that awareness of how we're feeling and to bring that compassion towards ourselves, I think is really important, and it's important modeling for our students. And again, just creating those caring environments and relationships with kids where they feel loved and nurtured and supported is key. So I want to just thank you so much for listening and for having me, Subbu. It's been a real pleasure and a real honor for me to follow Mark as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Molly, for such an insightful session. I'll open up the floor for questions. We have time for a couple of questions. So I'll open the floor for questions. Audience, you can either raise your hand or type in a question in the questions box, and we can moderate that. Questions doesn't have to be questions. It can be thoughts. It can be comments. Oh, we're reading a little bit in the reading a little bit in the chat box. What we bring in the room is what impacts the students. My takeaway says a gentleman, Divine, from Ghana Education Service, is a teacher, and we know him well. Yeah, so that was a great comment there. And certainly about the fact that there is a raised hand. Yay. Okay, here we go. And that's Gayatri's raised her hand, so I'm going to hand her the mic. Why am I not surprised?
Hey Molly, thank you so much for such a beautiful session. But what question I have is that while we're trying to teach something like this to younger children, helping them define their emotions, children also learn from what they observe and see around them. So when there is a conflict of situation, in the sense there is something that is being taught in the school and explained or modeled, but whereas when you come back home, the child sees something else, then how does a child perceive this conflict that is presented in front of him or her? How do you think what is it that they learn when they see multiple things that are different, but the situation is the same?
Oh, okay. So I'm just going to clarify. So you mean when they're seeing a response to a conflict in one way at school and a different way at home?
Yeah.
That is challenging. And I think this really speaks to the need for systemic SEL that's inclusive of families.
Right.
And so I know that you are all doing this. And so I think it is problematic for young children to try to make sense of that developmentally, because they have their ability to hold different perspectives is more limited. So yes, I think it would create a problem. Younger children are very much can hold one perspective. So I don't have a perfect answer. I think what I would say is the importance of including families and parents in this journey around social and emotional learning. And I know from your work that you're doing this through your Connect program. And so that there can be common language and common practice, because it is a huge issue if what we say and do in one place doesn't match in another. So you bring forth a real issue. And I would say for the field of social emotional learning, in my experience in Canada, trying to engage families can be hard. We have meetings and hold workshops, and the ones that come are the ones that need it the least. So we have, right? So this is a larger issue that I think we as a field need to become more creative. How do we reach families? How do we also invite them in and have conversations to find that again, contextualizing what we're doing in a way that's respectful to their views. And so one small tip that I would have would be to invite families in. Of course, it's hard to do right now, but through technology now, invite them into the classroom to participate in some, especially in young preschool or young elementary. Give them the opportunity to observe, be a part of some of the learning.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Molly.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, Subu, your mic's off. Your mic is still off.
Oh, come on. Okay. Third time's a charm, right? Molly, there was a request from Divine from Ghana asking if you could share some activities that educators can use to engage learners to learn about regulating their emotions. I think that's more of sort of a curriculum slash activities kind of request. And if you have any resources or open source resources or references that you could pass on to us later, Divine will make sure that reaches you. Is that okay?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. And I will say that Learning Curve probably has some resources as well that I would include that. Yes, but I'm happy to.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, we'll do that. Great. I think yes, I think we've